Hello, how are you? Today I'm going to answer a big question that people have. What is the best flour to use as a substitute for wheat flour? Many people don't want to eat wheat flour, sometimes because of gluten, due to some kind of intolerance, celiac disease. Other people avoid it because it raises blood sugar a lot, and also because it's low in nutrients, low in fiber, and generally poor in nutritional value. And people ask me what they can use as an alternative that tastes good, works well in recipes, and isn't too expensive. You have to take all of that into consideration. Stay here with me because I'm going to review the main types of flour for you. You won't want to miss them. First of all, if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. I post new videos every day and you won't want to miss them, including recipes without wheat flour. I'll leave a link down below to this playlist, which I know you'll love since you're watching this video. And if you know someone who wants more tips and wants to learn more about the different types of flour, which one is the healthiest, which one is the best option, share this video with them. Let's work together, you and I, to grow this chain of good, because that's what I want most for this channel. A lot of people ask me if the best flour is coconut flour, eggplant flour, almond flour, or even oat flour. People ask me to talk more about these flours, so I'll cover all that now. Let's get started. Wheat is a cereal, so when we think about finding a substitute for wheat, the first thing that usually comes to mind is to look for another cereal or grain, preferably one that has more or less the same general type of composition and nutritional profile. And a really interesting option is oat flour, which I actually use a lot here on the channel in various recipes I make. Why do I use oat flour so much? It's very rich in fiber, packed with beta-glucan, has a really good amount of protein, and of course it contains carbohydrates, but they're absorbed more slowly than those in wheat flour. So, it's a very interesting option, especially because its flavor is quite neutral. It works well in both sweet and savory dishes. And when you add some kind of yeast or leavening agent, it rises nicely, gives a good texture, and the price is also very reasonable. I know we have to think about that when we develop accessible recipes for the general population. We have to take the cost of food into consideration. So oat flour is an excellent option. Still along the lines of oat flour, these flours that have a relative amount of carbohydrates but also contain fiber and protein, we have two other very interesting directions as well. One is chickpea flour, which, although it also has a large amount of carbohydrates, is what we call a slow carb because it is absorbed very slowly, since it also has a high amount of soluble fiber and protein. However, chickpea flour is sometimes a bit more expensive and less accessible for most people, but if you can afford to buy it, you can use it. It's a good option. It's also quite neutral for both sweet and savory recipes and works really well. Another option is quinoa flour, but because quinoa flour naturally contains saponins, it often has a bitter aftertaste. So maybe for sweet recipes, depending on your palate and if you're not used to it, you might not like it. But it's also very rich in protein, good fiber, and medium absorption carbohydrates. So it's a great option, much healthier than white flour. Let's also talk now about two other types of flour that have more or less the same kind of composition, which are two low-carb flours, as we call them. These can be nut flours, such as almond flour, which is the most common, peanut flour, walnut flour, and also coconut flour. These nut-based flours are good for reducing the amount of carbohydrates, replacing regular flour with a flour that has less carbohydrate and therefore has less impact on blood sugar levels. They are widely used in many recipes for weight loss and diabetes management. They are truly a good choice, both for their nutritional properties and from a culinary standpoint. It can turn out soft, and it has a lot of moisture because it contains monounsaturated fats, super healthy, as well as polyunsaturated fats that come from nuts like peanuts, walnuts, and especially almonds, which are not only highly nutritious but also the most widely sold overall. It brings many benefits. Lots of fiber, very moist, resulting in a really good preparation. But what's the downside? It's the price. For the vast majority of people, it's very difficult to live on almond flour. Peanut flour you can make at home. It's a bit more affordable, but it has a stronger flavor, a very pronounced peanut taste, which for sweet recipes, once again, can be really good. But for savory dishes, the peanut flavor might end up tasting a bit odd in that preparation. That's why it hasn't become as trendy as almond flour, which has a more neutral flavor. Coconut flour is another interesting option. It's also very low in carbohydrates and also contains fat. And remember, the difference between coconut fat and the fat from nuts is the type of fat. Coconut contains saturated fat, so if you make a recipe with eggs and more fat, you'll need to try to balance it out by including healthier and different sources of fat, so you don't end up with too much saturated fat in that dish. That's a very important point. And besides that, coconut flour is very dry. So when we add it to a recipe, it absorbs the water and the fat. So sometimes you have to add more fat, more oil, more eggs, more liquids to make it creamier. So many times it ends up being very high in calories. So if you're not following a low-carb diet, it might not be such an interesting alternative. Now, in terms of price, it's usually quite affordable, so you can incorporate it into recipes. I have some recipes here with almond flour, coconut flour. I'll leave them for you down below in the video description. Let's go back now to some flours that are rich in carbohydrates but don't contain gluten and are common flours used in everyday life. We have rice flour, which can be made from white rice or whole grain rice, and corn flour, in fact, cornstarch, which is what I want to talk about more specifically for baking and making sauces. It's very common to use that really white one. Regarding rice flour and cornstarch, the amount of carbohydrates is quite high and the amount of fiber is very low. Whole grain rice flour has a bit more fiber, so it's a little better, but even so, the carbohydrate content is still very high and the fiber content, relatively speaking, is extremely low. They will cause a significant spike in insulin. If you have a gluten restriction and you need alternative sources, sometimes to add to some bread or a recipe, these can be healthy options for you. But for the majority of people who do not restrict gluten, they are not the best choices because in reality, they are practically the same as white wheat flour. Of course, to make some gluten-free preparations, sometimes we use a bit of cornstarch or rice flour to make it fluffier, to help it rise more. And in these cases, we add some of those other flours with more fiber, such as almond flour, for example. Or we add chia, flaxseed, pumpkin seeds, sesame seeds to bring in healthy fats and fiber to lower its glycemic index. That could be an option for you to use if that's the case. Still along the same lines of flour with a lot of carbohydrates and little fiber, little protein, little fat. In other words, greatly increasing insulin and rapidly raising the amount of carbohydrates in our blood. I have to tell you about cassava flour, sweet starch, sour starch, and even tapioca starch itself, which are also widely used. All of them come from cassava or yucca, and they actually have more carbohydrates than wheat flour itself. So once again, it's the same situation as with rice flour and cornstarch. If you want to remove and replace them because of the gluten, that's fine, but remember that they can cause an insulin spike. And you'll need to make those combinations I mentioned earlier, adding more good protein, more healthy fats, and more fiber to generally improve the quality of your meal. Now, let's also talk about two flours that have more or less the same composition: eggplant flour and passion fruit flour. These are very interesting flours because they naturally have a lower amount of carbohydrates, they're also low carb, and they have a very high amount of soluble fiber. And they're extremely beneficial for cholesterol, great for the proper functioning of your intestines, and very helpful for regulating your blood glucose levels and improving insulin levels because you've improved your blood glucose. They're excellent for your health, truly wonderful. If you can add passion fruit flour, especially to sweet recipes, and eggplant flour to savory dishes, that's perfect. Some people complain about the taste of eggplant flour. I personally don't think it's a problem at all, but it really depends on individual preference. Always remember to season your food well to help mask the flavor. Some people even use it diluted in water or some kind of drink before meals in green juice to lower the glycemic index, which is another approach. And always remember that you can make it at home. I even have a video here on the channel talking about passion fruit flour and how to make it yourself. So if you're interested, I'll leave it down below in the description for you to watch. And now, tell me down below if you were surprised by any of these flours. Did you think you were making a good calorie swap, but realized it wasn't quite like that? Which one are you going to start using now? I would love to read your comment. Share this video with anyone you know who would appreciate this information. Let's do this together, you and me, and expand this chain of good, because that's what I want here with the channel. And also, speaking of helping each other, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. I have new videos every day about fitness, health, nutrition, and lots of recipes using these flours, as well as many recipes that are affordable, quick, and healthy, because that's what we want in our daily lives: convenience and health. See you next time. Bye.